we have enough for a quorum. So what I'm going to do is let's get this meeting started, please. Aaron, are you going to do the roll call?
If you don't mind.
Yes, please. Thank you.
Councilmember Moreno, present. Councilmember Giarrusso, present.
Here.
Councilmember Glapion,
Present.
Councilmember Banks,
Present.
Councilmember Brosette,
Here.
Councilmember Gustafson Palmer.
She's here.
Okay. And Councilmember Nguyen does not serve on the committees, but is here also. We have a quorum of both committees. Councilmember, you may proceed.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Let's first start off with remembering we're still in the virtual world, which means we're conducting all of our business via Zoom. I am going to read the agenda in a minute, and then we will take a 15-minute break. Even though there are no voting items on the agenda, we thought it was important if people had comments either about energy or Sewage and Water Board or both to send those in to us, and we will read them as we get through the meeting. I also want to note that this is a joint meeting of the Utilities Committee and the Public Works Committee, so that we can talk about issues not only relating to what happened last week with the blackout with Energy. Councilmember Moreno will lead those discussions, and then we'll segue into power issues with Sewage and Water Board and other Sewage and Water Board issues that we discuss as well. Also, when we come back from break, I guess if anybody has any opening comments as council members they want to make, I will welcome those. And with that, I will get to reading the agenda, and now's the time. We'll take a 15-minute break from there. So number one, roll call, we've accomplished that. Number two, discussion of February 15, 16 during the winter weather event. Subpart A, Energy New Orleans LLC will give a presentation explaining how certain areas were selected for outages and reports that power was cut to Sewage and Water Board drinking water intake pumps. Subpart B, Sewage and Water Board of New Orleans will discuss the impact of the severe weather on its system. Number three, presentation discussion of Sewage and Water Board quarterly report. SWIBNO will present on its February 1, 2021 quarterly report submitted pursuant to Louisiana Revised Statute 334091 with a focus on power, billing, customer service, and finances. And number four, adjournment. So with that, it is now 10:06. We will stand at ease until 10:21. Thank you.
See y'all in 15.
Yes, and if anybody has public comments, please submit them in the next 15 minutes. We will attend to those. Hey, everybody. I think we're about 2 minutes from coming back. Paul, let me ask you this. I can see all the council members on, and I see one person from Entergy, but I know they had.
Hey, council member, I'm letting people in.
Okay, thank you, Aaron. Appreciate that. And we'll start back in a little over a minute, everybody. All right, with that, by my clock, we should be ready to call the meeting back to order. Councilmember Moreno, I know you want to start with what happened last week. I just wanted to say something sort of quickly before you got underway, which was this: when this council was first seated, I guess now almost 3 years ago, the at-larges decided that the chairs of the Smart Cities, Utilities, and Public Works Committee would all sit on each other's committees. And the purpose of that was so that there be an open flow of communication and making sure that these issues that surround utilities and public works and infrastructure got the proper attention and guidance that they needed. I would also note that other members of the council who don't sit on committees, like Councilmember Wynn is here today. I think she's hosting a meeting this week in her district to discuss public works issues. Councilmember Banks, of course, sits on the Sewage and Water Board. Councilmember Palmer is chair of transportation and also frequently reminds us about the needs of her residents across the river. And Councilmember Brissett has been a staunch reminder of the issues of reliability and what's going on there. And so I think we wanted to convene all of these folks today and thank Entergy for participating along with Sewage and Water Board. But it's crucial when we have either weather events, hot, cold, rain, to make sure that we're all on the same page. And I know as chair of the Utilities Committee, the council president has issues she wants to walk through, questions that we all have. So with that, Councilmember Moreno.
Councilmember Giarrusso, did you want to recertify the quorum before we?
Yes, we should do that. I know that we don't vote, but I think as a matter of good practice, that'd be great. Thank you.
Thanks, Councilman. Councilman Giarrusso, present. Councilmember Moreno, present. Councilmember Banks.
Present.
Councilmember Glapion.
Present.
Councilmember Brissett.
Present.
Councilmember Gilselson Palmer.
Present.
All right, we have a quorum, council members. Thank you.
All right,
Thank you.
appreciate it. And thank you so much, Councilmember Giarrusso, for allowing the Utilities Committee to join your committee today. I know that this was originally a Public Works Committee day, so I appreciate you allowing us to join so we can talk about these really important matters that are related to last week's freezing temperatures and of course the rolling blackouts as well. Let me just begin by saying that, today we are really demanding answers about the problem that arose on February 16th. That includes communications around blackouts, along with information about why certain neighborhoods were chosen to be shut off and others were not. Also, critical infrastructure, lost power. Why did this occur and how can this be prevented in the future? There are also some long-term measures that I think are important to discuss as well, including ensuring that weatherization for our power infrastructure is occurring to prevent a situation like what happened over in Texas. So let me go back to Mardi Gras night, which was the event of the blackouts, which was the evening of the blackout. Information that we received is that operators of the grid that we're on, called MISO, directed Entergy New Orleans to shed 26 megawatts of load immediately. Entergy New Orleans began to shut off power, but failed to inform the media or their customers that this was happening until 2 hours after the event began. Not one social media post or text alert or email to customers or a news release was sent out. So that meant that businesses were scrambling, trying to understand what was happening. Concern and confusion spread among families, unsure of just how long they were going to be stuck in the cold. I put information on my social media, and that's how the public was receiving information on what was happening that evening with the rolling blackouts, not from the company that they pay to provide power. The council did receive an email from Becky Knox, who is the Vice President of Regulatory Affairs, explaining to the council that the shedding event began at 6:52 in the evening. Her email came to us at 7:35, and at 8:33 that evening, I responded back to Ms. Knox, along with council staff and our advisors all CC'd, in an email that read, Becky, communication with the public is key during situations like this. It has been almost 2 hours since the directive, and there has been no media alert sent by Entergy New Orleans. News stations are quoting CLECO's news release and my social media as to what's happening with the blackouts. Please provide the public with information. Thank you, Helena Moreno. I received a response back from her after 10 o'clock when the event had ended. What is frustrating here is that this is now the second hearing in just a matter of weeks that we are addressing the issues of poor communication by Entergy New Orleans to the public when it is a critical time. Last month, you failed to alert your customers that usage levels were hitting extraordinary levels. And now this month, failed to communicate with the public when the company began to enact rolling blackouts. When I said last month, well, actually during a hearing just a few weeks ago, that Entergy needed to be better with communications, I didn't mean with just volume. I didn't mean just start doing more interviews or more social media posts or more just text alerts. It's not about volume. It's about being able to effectively communicate when it matters, during critical times or during times of emergencies. That's when communication is key. And that is what Entergy, unfortunately, has continued to fail at. And do not just take it from me. Last Tuesday evening, WDSU anchor Sherman DeSalle tweeted about Entergy Communications saying, yes, and I have the actual tweet printed out. Yes, better comms are needed. This has been indicated in several news stories, council meetings on both sides of the river, social media posts, etc. On the evening of the 16th, there was also a failure to communicate why certain neighborhoods lost power over others. The next day, still there was no explanation. A week later, we still don't have an answer, but I'm hoping today we will get answers. Lack of this type of information only creates distrust and adds skepticism. Neighborhoods, particularly predominantly Black neighborhoods, felt targeted by the company during the blackouts. And when there is no explanation from the company proving that these neighborhoods were not, then what are people to believe? Also on the evening of the 16th, a portion of power was shut off to the Sewage and Water Board. This is now the second time that this has happened since 2018. I'll remind everyone that in 2018, Entergy cut power to the Sewage and Water Board after a car hit a utility pole. After that, we were assured that plans were being put in place to prevent such mistakes. So the question is, what went wrong on the 16th and how can this be prevented in the future? And finally, I'll just say that long-term measures must be implemented to prevent catastrophic situations like what happened in Texas. Initial reports out of Texas determined that all types of power plants failed: nuclear, coal, natural gas, and wind due to lack of weatherization. Because of that, I have directed the advisors to begin an assessment of Entergy power plants to ensure weatherization is where it needs to be. So with that, I will turn it over to, I believe it's Becky Knox and John Hawkins, who will be leading the discussion on Entergy part today.
Thank you, Council Member Marino. I appreciate your comments very much. And I agree with you that it is critical. Communications is absolutely essential to provide to customers, not necessarily to your point about volume, but more to provide them with information when it matters. And we'll talk through some of that. How about now? We'll talk through some of that today in our comments. We have assembled for you a multidisciplinary team to address the circumstances around the customer outage event that occurred last week, and to attempt to really answer some of those questions that you might have. But before I introduce our team, I was hoping to give just a quick brief overview of some of the events that we experienced. So as you all know, last week's storm was a historic event. It didn't just involve snow and ice and sleet and rain, but also extremely cold temperatures across much of the South. The intensity of those conditions and the length of the time that they lasted, the geography which it covered, which was a very wide swath, all contributed to extremely high demand for electricity and limited generating sources to meet that growing demand. The combination of those conditions really did present a unique challenge, forcing MISO South members utilities, which includes Entergy New Orleans, as well as other Entergy operating companies, to implement immediate customer outages to permit MISO to balance the available generation with the customer demand. To your point, Councilmember Marino, we understand that when customers lose power unexpectedly, it is a huge inconvenience and an unwanted disruption to their lives. We also understand that when customers are inconvenienced by a power outage like the one last week, they quickly begin looking for answers, and many times those questions are directed to you as the council members. So it is incumbent on us to provide you with timely information to be able to reasonably address your constituents' questions based on the information available to us at the time. As you will hear from the discussion today, again, I point to the highly unprecedented nature of the event. There were several moving parts, and although, to your point, in the days ahead, there was a great deal of volume and increased customer messaging, our communications to customers as the outage was happening in real time could have been more timely, absolutely. We have already implemented procedures to ensure that we do better in that regard in the future, and we will do better. In addition to communications issues, today we wanted to make sure we discuss the timeline for the event, up to and including how the distribution planning organization executed the directive from MISO to shed load, as well as how the system is set up to identify feeders that can be shed when they are required to do so suddenly. We will also speak to the outage to one of the 3 feeders that serve the Sewer and Water Board's Carrollton plant, and how that issue was rectified to avoid it happening again in the future. Like any storm event, there is always opportunities to learn, to adjust, and to improve so that we can reduce those inconveniences to our customers to the greatest extent possible. And I believe this event was no different. We are still in the process of collecting and reviewing relevant data and working through all the impacts of the entire storm event, but we hope to provide you with as much information as possible today. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to our speakers. We'll begin today with Jim Schott, our VP of Transmission. Jim?
Good morning. Good morning, Madam Chair and fellow council members.
I appreciate the opportunity to address the February 16 event, evening load shed event in New Orleans. I do serve as transmission vice president for our Entergy services group. My organization performs planning, maintenance, and operations for the entire Entergy transmission system across all 4 states. We're here today to discuss the load shedding event that happened on the evening of February 16th. And I thought it might be important for the council and the public for me to first define load shedding as a tool for ensuring system reliability in emergency events so that we can all be on the same page. Entergy belongs to the Mid-Continent Independent System Operator. It's commonly called MISO for short. MISO is one of several regional transmission organizations interconnected across the eastern United States. The electric grid depends on the constant balance of load and generation. In the event that generation is not available to serve load, we must act immediately to reduce load, or the entire system can be lost to blackouts, resulting in catastrophic damage to equipment and extensive time to recover. And I'll share an analogy. If you just imagine our system is a suspension bridge, the cables suspending those bridge spans are like all the generators in the Eastern Interconnection. And the cars on the bridge are equivalent to all the customers using the Eastern Interconnect for electricity. The weight of the cars weighing on the bridge's supports and cables is like the weight of our customers' electricity usage on the system. The freezing temperatures resulted in the loss of generators across the Midwestern and southern portions of our country. And for the example, in our example with the bridge, this would be like losing some strands of the suspension cables. So all the while, more and more cars are getting on the bridge from both ends. System operators started to see signs that if action was not taken, the bridge would collapse. The action was to get cars off the bridge, getting the weight down to where the compromised cable and bridge could support the weight. And the cars that were removed obviously were analogous to your customers that we had to interrupt. The event last Tuesday was a MISO South-wide event where load had to be reduced across the system because there was not enough generation to meet demand and protect the system had something gone wrong. I want to emphasize that this was an emergency event, and the decline in weather conditions caused issues across many areas of the country. Systems across the Midwest and southern portions of the United States experienced extreme cold weather and ice, record levels of electric load, and the loss of generation. Customers in many portions of the Midwest and South lost power for various durations over the course of last week. And here in New Orleans, as you will see later in presentation by Mr. Hawkins, 26,000 customers were interrupted for a total of 1 hour and 40 minutes. And like you council members, we never want our customer service to be interrupted, but the action was necessary to protect the grid from potentially experiencing a much longer and more catastrophic event. As Mr. Darrell Brown with MISO will describe after me, conditions on the grid were such that the event was necessary. Exceptionally high electric demand within MISO and its neighboring systems exceeded forecasts. Several generating units across the MISO South footprint became unavailable as the day progressed, and MISO was unable to access emergency power from neighboring systems given the state of emergency, not only in our region, but in our neighbors. So as loads reached levels in MISO South above what would allow the system to continue to be resilient, should we have lost another transmission line or another generator, which was a very real possibility at the time of the event, MISO was required to take action to lower loads and prevent the possibility of significant system damage. At 6:50 p.m. Central, MISO issued a maximum emergency event step 5 requiring 700 megawatts of load shed across all of MISO South. Once that directive is given, our operators at the Entergy transmission control centers in Little Rock and Jackson, Mississippi, give directives to our distribution operation centers around the 4 states, and automated load shed programs are executed. I want to emphasize that when Entergy receives a directive from MISO to shed load, we are obligated to follow that directive and act quickly within 30 minutes to ensure that we timely shed the amount of load as directed to maintain the integrity of the Eastern Interconnection. MISO required 700 megawatts of load shed across MISO South, and Entergy operating companies accordingly each had to do their part and interrupt customers. E&O led shed load to approximately 26,000 customers. Mr. Hawkins is going to provide you information regarding the actual execution of the directive on a distribution level and when those customers were restored. And at this time, I'll turn it over to MISO's representative, Mr. Darrell Brown, who's going to provide you an overview of his organization and explain the processes for instructing the company to initiate a load shed event.
Okay, thank you, Jim. I appreciate that. My name is Darrell Brown. I'm the Executive Director of External Affairs for South Region. I have 3 slides that I'm going to cover. The one that you see here is who is MISO. We'll talk about what is the role of MISO, and then the load shed event itself that took place on February 16th. As you can see here, MISO is a 501c4, not-for-profit organization that oversees the transmission superhighway for Central U.S., and we've been doing this since 2001. The South Region came on board in 2013. Our service territory covers 15 states and 1 in Canada. 42 million end-use customers, 75,000 megawatts of generation, right at 66,000 miles of transmission, with 180 members and 471 market participants. Slide 2, please. All right, this slide depicts the different components of the bulk electric system. For everyone to receive electricity when they need it, you got to be able to do 3 things, right? Got to be able to generate it, transport it to where it needs to be, the location where the demand actually calls for it. And whenever any one of these things are out of sync, whether that's a car hitting a distribution pole, a major hurricane like we experienced several months ago, or an Arctic winter event like we just experienced, MISO as the reliability coordinator, our job is to protect the integrity of that bulk electric system within our footprint. While we don't own any of these assets, we do manage the process that ensures reliable, safe delivery of power to the utilities, which in turn gets to your business or your home. Slide 3. Okay, this here shows the actual load shedding process that we go through. But before this ever happens, it's important to know that throughout the year, right, summer and winter, there are joint trainings that take place, best practice meetings, executive meetings, so that we can collaborate with members between MISO and us. Several days leading up to this particular event, we established daily synchronization calls between operations, regulatory, as well as corporate communications. So as far as the load shed event itself, as Jim stated earlier, and Becky as well, this from 6:50 Central Time, there was a loss of 2,500 megawatts of generation, and this ended around 8 p.m. Central, so just under 2 hours that this event occurred. We used all levers that were at our disposal. That's calling on demand response customers as well as public appeal for conservation. We reached out to our neighbors, SPP and Southern Company, but they were in the same situation as us. Therefore, as a result of that, we had to shed 700 megawatts. This was a pro rata share, right? About 2% of the demand for that day. And this was spread out across all of our LBAs, right? Load balancing authorities, Southeast Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Arkansas, and New Orleans. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you today on behalf of MISO. I'll turn the mic over to John Hawkins, the Vice President of Operations with Entergy. John?
Thank you, Darrell. Good morning, council members. My name is John Hawkins, and I'm the Vice President of Distribution Operations for Louisiana and New Orleans. This morning, I plan to provide you an overview of what happens once a load shed directive is received. I will also clarify how feeders are selected for our load shed list. And lastly, why the feeder for the sewer and water board was included. If we receive the directive for a load shed event, the following happened. MISO issues directive to the local balancing authority, or LBA, along with the amount of load that needs to be shed. And at that point, the 30-minute clock begins. The LBA determines which load pockets need to have load shed and provides requests to our Transmission Control Center, or TCC. The TCC validates the request and calls to provide directions to our Louisiana Distribution Operations Control Center, or DOC. The DOC then enters the amount of load to be shed into our SCADA system for the specific load pockets and executes the request. Once the directive is canceled, communication is provided and load is restored. Now, in preparation for a load shed event affecting Louisiana, on an annual basis, we review our load shed plan to update for any changes, for example, like system configurations that may have taken place over the past year. During that plan review, we validate that the list of distribution feeders appropriately categorizes each feeder using categories that I will describe in just a moment. The categories indicate the load that has the least amount of risk to public safety and health if it is included in the shedding event. So there are 4 categories of feeders. Priority 3, that's mostly residential. And most of these feeders are primarily comprised of residential customers. Priority 2, residential and commercial customers own a feeder. And this feeder is generally comprised of a mix of residential and commercial customers. Priority 1, some critical customers own the feeder. So it's a mixed use feeder where you have mixed customers on that feeder. And this typically includes maybe at least one fire or police station and or non-emergency medical centers. And then priority 0 is mostly critical customers. And those critical customers can be emergency medical facilities, feeds dedicated to public infrastructure, water treatment, or evacuation shelters. Now, characterizing these feeders is not an exact science, and we recognize that power interruption can be a burden to our customers. When it is necessary to interrupt customers to preserve the grid, we work to distribute those interruptions as equitably as possible, taking into account system needs. And excuse me. Additionally, we have learned recently it is necessary to validate our categorizations more frequently to avoid our designations becoming out of date. For example, this is what happened when a feeder to one of the Sewage and Water Board locations was dropped during this event. This is a signal because we had this public infrastructure miscategorized because historically there would have been a redundant or backup feed to generation that would have prevented power from being interrupted at this facility. We will be
Mr.
working.
Hawkins, real quick, let me stop you there.
Yes, ma'am.
So back and explain that to me. So why was this particular feeder missed?
The way we had reviewed it in the past is that it had a redundant source. So that's why it was on the list.
Why did you think it had a redundant?
What was that?
Why did you think it had a redundant source?
There is a source that can feed this vault from the Sewage and Water Board. A source of generation.
And so what happened? Was it not operational or something?
That I do not know if it was operational or not. We would need to ask the Sewage and Water Board.
Okay, so what you're saying is it was not on the list of critical infrastructure because it had a redundant source. So are there any other feeders that you have right now that you think may have redundant sources to Sewage and Water Board that are not on the list in a comprehensive review? I mean, I think it would be important to, whatever is feeding into Sewage and Water Board, that be initially on the list, whether it has redundant sources or not.
Yeah, and Councilmember Moreno, what we did immediately following was review all of those Sewage and Water Board feeds for exactly just that, just to make sure we didn't miscategorize any of them. And that was performed the following day.
And what did you find? Were any others miscategorized?
No, this was the only one.
So this was the only one. Got it.
Yes,
I
ma'am.
have to, and before we go too far ahead and get onto the communications piece, so it either would be Mr. Schott or you, Mr. Hawkins, that can help me with this. Mr. Schott, I believe you said that with these rolling blackouts, that 26,000 customers lost power during these blackouts. Is that correct?
That's my understanding. from the distribution count. That's for New Orleans.
Okay, so what you're saying is that 26,000 customers equals 26 megawatts? Because I just, look, I'm not a utility
No.
Entergy expert. Doesn't add
Yeah,
up.
no, I think that 26,000 customers was the amount that was shed in the event for the city. That's the count.
So how many megawatts does that add up to?
John, do we have the number on the amount for New Orleans that was it 26 megawatts?
26 megawatts is what it was assigned to New Orleans.
But that's not the question I'm asking. The question I'm asking is how much was actually shed?
Claire, are there no comments for Sewage and Water Board?
Can anyone answer that question on how much was actually shed? I know what was ordered. I mean, Mr. Hawk or Becky and Ms. Knox. Can y'all hear me?
Hey, Councilmember Moreno, can
Yes.
you hear me? Can
Yep,
you hear
I
me,
can
ma'am?
hear you now, Mr. Hawkins, go ahead.
Yes, ma'am. And as you know, this event just took place last week, and we're working to pull that information together to validate the customers and the megawatts that were actually displayed. Yes, ma'am.
Stop you.
Excuse me,
Please,
the
somebody-
answer is 81 megawatts.
Well, we shed 81 megawatts when we were only ordered to shed 26. How did we shed almost 4 times the amount of power we needed to when we only needed to shed 26? Can y'all hear me okay? So, I mean, we left people in the cold then that didn't need to be left in the cold. Businesses shut down that evening. There were restaurants full of people because it was the evening of Mardi Gras that were finally able to make some money during this pandemic that had to shut down because they lost power and customers walked out of their businesses. So why did we shed over 80 megawatts when only ordered to shed 26? Okay.
Yeah, it's my understanding that the directive was for the 26 megawatts. It appears from the discussion that there was a larger number. We'd have, and as John explained, we have to go back through that process and make sure that those numbers and those feeders and our processes around those automatic programs are correct. And that's certainly been happening.
Guys, you're killing me here. I'm just gonna be honest. You know, I mean, first communications, as we mentioned, was a nightmare. You know, and then, you know, people still don't understand why you shut off certain neighborhoods. And now we're finding out that you didn't even need to shut off certain neighborhoods. I mean, you shut off almost 4 times the amount of power that you needed to on one of the coldest nights that we've had, and I don't even know how long. It's rare that I'm speechless, but I am absolutely just amazed by this. I'm amazed. And then you all can't even explain today as to why it happened. I mean, it took a while just to even get an understanding of you know, somebody, thank you for coming forward, Ms. Zimmerer, with the answer to my question of how many megawatts were actually shed. But this is so unacceptable. Like I said, I'm almost to the point where I'm just speechless. So let's just kind of go over this again. You shut off power, not only, of course, to a critical piece of infrastructure that we had, the Sewage and Water Board, and it was what you shut power off to actually had to deal with our drinking water, and thank God it got restored quickly. But then you also shut off power to, you know, families and businesses that didn't need to have their power shut off to begin with. And now we're just finding out a week later. So with all of that being said, now that we know that you shut off more power than you needed to, how did you all then pick what neighborhoods or what areas you were going to shed power from? And anyone can take that question.
Councilmember, can I jump in for a second too? I mean, I think to your point, 81 megawatts is 3 times the amount of what we've been told. I mean, 78 is 3 times. I mean, how did we, I really want to understand how we got from the 26 megawatts to shed to almost 3 times that amount. And I guess also, why we're finding out for the first time today under questioning that it was 3 times that amount.
And Joe, if you would let me chime in, I am just sitting here just seething and bewildered at the same time. I have never heard anything about this large of a number. I was told that MISO required the number that it required. So somebody please clarify why that number went up 3 times. And this is totally unacceptable. Somebody got to say something, and everybody can't look at everybody else and wonder. Somebody made a decision. So somebody please own that now. Explain what happened and why it did, because this is totally unacceptable. And I'm hearing crickets. Now maybe, I don't know if my mic is broken and nobody heard me, because I usually have technical problems. But at the end of the day, somebody say something.
Councilmember Banks and Councilmember Moreno, we're looking into just that to understand why it looks to be more. Yes,
you know what? Look, I know that I hope that CEO David Ellis is nearby, and Mr. Ellis, if you can hear me, I actually want you now to be part of this meeting, because now we have a real, we've had a major situation, but now we have a really significant situation here. So Mr. Ellis, if you are nearby, I'm actually calling for you to now be part of this utility committee meeting. If somebody from Entergy could let Mr. Ellis know, and I'll part of this.
Here, hold on. You need to turn on the video.
Can you hear me? I don't have headphones.
That's okay. Hold on. I'll fix it.
Councilmember Moreno, if I could just jump in as well.
Yeah.
Hang on 1 second. Ellis on right as we speak. So 1 second. And now Mr. Pearson is not just getting him on right now. So just 1 second. Mr. Ellis, I see you now. Look, I hope that you've been listening.
Can you hear me clearly?
Thank you. I can hear you. I can hear you, Mr. Ellis. Can you hear me?
Okay, I can.
Mr. Ellis, I hope that you've been listening to this meeting, because the council, the entire council, is incredibly, I mean, to the point of being incensed, and our frustration level has absolutely peaked in learning that even though we were directed to shed 26 megawatts of power, 81 megawatts was shed. We do not have any type of understanding or received any information from you all as to why people lost power when they shouldn't have had to lose power. And it's really unacceptable. And this is the first we're hearing about it, Mr. Ellis. And I feel like, since you've gotten to your position as CEO, that you have tried to do what you could to inform council members of important matters. Well, this is really important. This matters. And the fact that a week after the event, I get it that you're still trying to get your information together, but a week after the event, you don't have the answer to this question. And this is the first time that we're hearing that more power was shed than needed to. As I mentioned before, Mr. Ellis, families, I had one person call me because they have 2 babies and they were like, oh my gosh, am I not going to have power for a whole day, 2 days? What is it? Well, now maybe they shouldn't have even lost power to begin with. Businesses, Ho-Shun restaurant, on St. Charles Avenue, totally packed, during Mardi Gras. Their customers all left when they lost power. and they lost all that money. And, you know, they didn't know what was happening, and now they shouldn't have lost power either. So what can you say about the fact that you can't explain, or people can't explain, but maybe you can, your people can't explain why more power was shed than needed to, a lot more, not even just a little bit more. I mean, if you told me that you shed 28 megawatts versus 26, you guys shed 81, and you shut off part of the sewage and water. So, I mean, what can you say to the council, to your customers, now that we know that this has happened?
I don't know that I can say anything to satisfy what you just communicated by way of your how upset you are about this event. I'm upset by the event as well. And so we are indeed trying to get some of the technical details
Mr.
to
Ellis,
marry up to the actions that occurred.
Ellis,
If you'll permit me to answer. If you'll permit me to answer you.
just one quick question though. Were you aware that that 81 megawatts was shed before today?
I was not aware of the finite amount, and I was aware that we were still trying to determine exactly how much it was. Here's my understanding of the events of that evening. When we received the order to curtail, we had a number of load pockets that we were to address. And within those load pockets, some of our breakers must have been listed multiple times. And so we're trying to walk through all of this detail and understand the exact amount and exactly how that happened to prevent that from happening again. You're correct. The amount that was allocated to New Orleans was 26 megawatts. The total amount to the state of Louisiana was somewhere in the neighborhood of 222, and somebody else can validate that. But the load shedding event that occurred that night took all of that into account, and the computer systems did what they did, and we are trying to unwind that and find out why they reacted the way they did. And we will provide you with infinitely more detail on that once we know. You're correct. You made a statement earlier that it's been about a week since the event, but you may the cold weather persisted even beyond Tuesday night. We had to deal with it again on Wednesday with public appeals, et cetera. And so we were literally, as questions were being asked, we were still in the middle of the very cold weather, and the system was in a pretty bad state. But we will provide that level of detail. We owe it to you. We owe it to our customers.
I'm going to turn it over to Banks.
Helena,
And David.
can I?
Councilmember Nguyen wanted to go first.
Yeah. Thank you, Councilmember
Okay.
Moreno. First of all, I'm extremely disturbed by this information. So I just want to have a comment, then I have a question. So I was on the phone with Becky that night expressing that 160 senior citizens in my district that lives at Peace Lake Towers were impacted by this. And then when it was shared with me that we needed to shed, I understood, but then finding out today that maybe those senior citizens did not have to suffer that night, it is extremely disturbing. It is extremely disturbing to hear about this. My question to, I don't know, Mr. Hawkins or Mr. Brown or Mr. Scott, but when you guys select the number of customers, the 25,707, and those, how did you come up with that number to ensure that you guys would get the 26 megawatts, or you guys just pick a number, or how do you guys determine that?
So the amount that's allocated by MISO to the system is our share of MISO South. That number is then broken down, as David described, into various load pockets and given directly to the local distribution operations centers, who then execute the programs that are there to for that specific area. So at that point, the details of the load shed plans to get to the amount that was allocated go to the distribution operations center and the programs that John has described.
So obviously, the system that you guys are using maybe need to be reevaluated, because obviously the number of customers that you guys have impacted really was not needed? And how often do you guys update your system? I mean, because this is really alarming, 3 times more than what we're supposed to shed. And again, I just keep going back to that evening when I was on the phone with Becky and expressing my concerns and the concerns of the residents, particularly at Peace Lake Towers. And I thought that it was critical that we needed to shed them off. And I tried to calm 160 senior citizens that evening. And today to find that out, again, just really disturbed by the whole situation today. It's extremely disturbed. Thank you, Councilmember Moreno.
You're welcome, Councilmember Nguyen. Let me take Councilmember Banks and then Councilmember Palmer.
Thank you, Council President. David, you really got me in a real uncomfortable position here, because I don't like being surprised, and I really don't like having to ask what I think are very questions that we shouldn't have to ask. Now, clarify for me, how does the Chief Operating Officer for Entergy New Orleans not know until this meeting that the number of Entergy New Orleans customers that were disconnected or exceeded the number that was required? Help me understand how that information is not known before however long ago you found out. Help me understand that.
Well, Councilmember Banks, can I jump in for one question? Because your question has an assumption, which is one of my questions, which is today the first day that it was known, or when was it known? I mean, I think the real question is who knew what when, right? And 26 is what we were told originally, but when did it come to light that it may be as much as 81? I think is what you're really asking, right?
Okay, that works. David?
But my response to that question is that we're still working to confirm those numbers. And so we're still working to understand why those numbers increased the way they did, but to confirm the actual amount that was curtailed. I'll just referencing something that Councilwoman Nguyen just mentioned about the criticality of the nature of the event. The event was a critical event. We needed to get offline very quickly. So I don't want to diminish the criticality of the event and the need to reduce demand on our grid. It was absolutely necessary. The question that you're asking, and that I cannot frankly confirm right now, is did we know that the number reduced was 80 megawatts? And the answer was no, we didn't definitively know that. And so we're still working on our postmortem from the storm so we can provide you with definitive information on what was shed, how it was shed, how we shed more in the New Orleans load pocket than was our stated pro rata share, and to provide you with a number of other answers that I'm sure you'll want to respond to.
So David, let me understand, because I'm not an engineer, so I need you to walk real slow with me. If you're still trying to confirm the number, it is quite possible that the number can be less than the 80 that we're talking about now, right?
It can be.
But it also is possible that it could be more, correct?
I guess that's a possibility as well. But, I would tell you that we're providing rough numbers based on the amount of loading for each of the feeders that serve those load pockets.
But I'm sorry to cut you off. Is it fair though, is it a fair assumption at this point that whether it's 80 or 82 or 76 or 50, it exceeds the number that MISO required that we turn off? Is that a fair assessment right now?
No, MISO did not give us 26 megawatts for the load pocket. That was the LBA, the Load Balancing Authority in the South. And so they split up the amounts, and Jim Schott, you'll have to help me if I'm wrong about the technical details. They split it up based on load pockets and allocated pro rata share. So the aggregate amount needed to be shed. The question that we're grappling with here, and the answer that we need to provide, is why so much more in New Orleans? Jim, did I get that right?
You got that right. The total amount across MISO South that Entergy operating companies was responsible for was executed. The question that the teams are working through is understanding how the automatic load sheds worked and what those ultimate total load amounts were when we start to reconcile customer counts with actual load. And as you've indicated, that's a fair amount of technical work to go back and look at what feeders were pulled, what, how they belong to Entergy Louisiana, Entergy New Orleans, et cetera, all of the different, what loads were actually there versus what would have been assumed. So, the teams have to work through all that, all those technical kind of after event, all the after event studies that this is one of many, given the just unprecedented nature of this whole situation.
And again, I'm going to preface this by saying I'm not an engineer, so I need y'all to walk real slow with me. How is a determination made, or what makes the determination of how or who is going to be cut off? Now, I want to go back to the initial premise that we're dealing with a number in the 20s. We ended up with a number in the 80s. So where is it that that determination was made to go from the 20s to the 80s? How is that derived at?
John, I'll ask you to jump into some of those details.
I'm sorry?
Councilmember Banks?
Yes.
Yeah, so remember the initial request for Louisiana, like Jim said, was 222 megawatts. So then that pro rata is put into the load pockets. So based on those load pockets, that's how many megawatts are assigned to each area.
I get that. But
okay.
Help me, let me go a whole nother way. Why is it that we were dealing with a number in the 20s and we're dealing with a number in the 80s now? I'm trying to understand, where did the disconnect come? Because we initially were told, I think it's 23. So why was that number disseminated as a number if that's not what it was? Where did that number come from?
And Councilmember Banks, in all honesty, that is what we are trying to determine also, to validate the why it was larger than what we thought.
Okay, then let me go a whole nother way then.
Yes, sir.
Who distributed the number 23? Did that come from you all? Did that come from Entergy New Orleans? Who initially put the number 23 out into the stratosphere? How did that even get into the public debate?
26.
I think the number. Yeah, I think the number is 26, Councilman Banks.
Okay, well, 26, whatever it is. How did that number even get disseminated that that's the number that we were all operating under? Did that come from Entergy New Orleans? Did that come from MISO? Did that come from the man on the moon? Where did that come from?
So the 26 megawatts was the load share amount for Entergy New Orleans of the total that was requested for all of Entergy. So that was the amount that was given to our distribution operations centers to execute their programs on their automatic shed programs. John described earlier that we have the prioritization, the various levels of priorities that are utilized and that are programmed, and their programs go pick feeders based on low priority to fill out that 26 megawatts. It appears that there were problems in those programs that led to more assigned to New Orleans feeders than others. I think that is this, and we're trying to work through understanding that.
Is that a problem with the equipment at Entergy New Orleans, Entergy Louisiana, Big Entergy, you guys? Where does the fault lie that we got burned in an exorbitant way? How were we the victims? Where did that come from? If somebody's computer is screwed up, whose is it?
That's part of the postmortem that we're performing, Councilman Banks.
And David, with all due respect, how long does the postmortem take?
Councilman Banks, it usually, we will provide you with those answers. We don't have those detailed answers today, but we are performing that assessment. We have been since the storm ended and we resumed normal operations, but we will provide this council with that information.
And David, I'm not trying to beat you up or to go off the rails too far. I'm trying very hard to stay focused on this. Give me an idea of how long this is going to take. Is this a week more? Is it a month more? Are we going to be dealing with this 3 years from now? How long does it take to figure out which computer was broken?
You know, I can tell you what we will target. We will try and provide that information within the next 30 days. I don't, yeah, I think we can make a lot of ground up then.
Well, I'm going to tell you, I will be patiently waiting those 30 days because I'm going to tell you, this is woefully unacceptable. And again, to be hit with this now, this should have been known long before then. And then my next question will be, how many other holes in the bucket are they? Now, we've discovered this one, but is there going to be another incident where we're required to cut off X and we cut off Y again? So once you determine where the hole is, are you going to be able to remedy it to ensure that this never happens again?
Well, we certainly will. I mean, that is the reason why we do postmortems after every storm. We do check and adjust, we pivot, and we improve our processes. This is the first time that this type of event has happened since we've been a member of MISO. And I've been trying to understand how long ago it's been since we've had this widespread a load shedding event. No one's been able to remember. They just remember load shedding events maybe close to 20 years ago. So this is done very infrequently, but this is a very high priority for us. And we understand that it is a high priority for you as well.
And if by chance there's another storm and we're required to load shed again, how do you all determine, will the same people that were burned this time get burned again, or how does that work?
No, and you know, I'll let John answer that question.
Yeah, Councilmember Banks, the way the program works, where it stops is where it starts the next time. So there were 15 feeders that were interrupted during this load shed event. So if there was another load shed event in 2 weeks, it would start at feeder 16 and start from there. And it continues to roll.
So that is a piece of good news for those residents that were adversely affected, that they are out of the rotation now. They don't have to worry about being turned off again in a case like this. And then how long is the duration on that? Does that exemption last until the end of this winter, or is it perpetual, or how long does that data stay relevant that those 15 feeders won't be affected again?
Well, Councilmember Banks, the way the program works, it depends on how much load and how long the event lasts. Because if you continue to cycle, you might make it back. You know, let's say it was an extended event over 24 hours, you could make it back to the beginning of the list. So it just depends on how long the next event is that you might make it back. So I wouldn't be able to speculate on that, sir.
And then my final question, and I'm gonna let you go. Who actually determines how long the load sharing, the duration? Who makes that determination, whether it's an hour and 40 minutes or 2 hours or 50 minutes? Who makes that call?
Well, my understanding is that each event, load shedding event, can last between 30 minutes and 2 hours, and then we roll to the next load. Is that procedurally not correct, John?
Yeah, that's correct. Yes, sir.
So a maximum of 2 hours for anybody.
Maximum of 2 hours, and then we would roll to the next set.
Okay. David, I'll be waiting to hear from you in 30 days, man. Thank you.
Thank you,
I will provide that detail.
So I just want to say this. I get it that Entergy is doing a postmortem, but you know, we don't have time to wait around for a lot of this information. And I actually want an independent review of this information. So I'm going to announce right now that I'd like to order the advisors to officially conduct an investigation into what happened with the rolling blackouts and why 3 times the amount of power was shut off. Clint, are you on? You're on with us, aren't you? Is Clint Vince
Yes,
on
I
with
am.
us?
Yes, I am, Council.
But how do I need to proceed with this? Do I need to move forward with the resolution? Give me your thoughts on how to proceed with the investigation.
My recommendation would be that you have a forensic investigation of what has just occurred that includes your technical and legal advisors. I believe that you can announce that today. We can informally get started. I would suggest you have a resolution to make it effective and that you direct the advisors to prepare a report for the council that would be public. Depending on the results of that report, you can then determine whether the issues of concern have been corrected or whether there is a need for a public docket and public and further action, either in the form of a prudence investigation. But initially, I think you just need an immediate forensic investigation. Also, we have been warning, and the council has been very alert to this, that with extreme weather conditions, turbulent weather associated with climate change, that's the new normal. And we have to be in a position of resilience and communication where we're no longer surprised by extreme weather events, even if they are unpredicted and higher than usual. We have to have levels of preparation that we have not needed in the past. And I would recommend that that be part of the investigation part of the report going forward.
Gotcha. Clint, thank you. Aaron, do you think you can put just a resolution stating some of the points that Clint mentioned for the council meeting on Thursday? Council members, once Aaron completes that, if we could take it upon suspension. I know that we're late on the Monday agenda, but I think that this is really important and we need to start moving forward and directing the advisors to do and have a thorough investigation as to what really happened.
Councilmember Moreno?
Yes, go ahead, Councilmember Palmer.
Thank you so much. And maybe perhaps I would respectfully recommend that within the resolution, we add some of the information that we're requesting, the different council members. One of the things that I think is wholly and lacking in this report or this presentation is a lack of maps in terms of which areas were shut off and which areas were not. So I would like to see those maps and how to do it. I would also like to know, you're talking about an automated, as someone from Entergy earlier just mentioned, an automatic shed agreement. So is there an actual shed agreement that Entergy New Orleans enters into with MISO and other entities that basically defines how this occurs?
There's the, yeah, well, it's not an agreement per se. I would say, the obligation of any electric utility under obligations with the North American Electric Reliability Corporation require us to follow standards, including following directives around load shed events to protect the larger bulk electric system. So
there's a set of standards then that
yes,
talk about load shed. So,
right.
So I would be very interested if our advisors show us what those standards are and whether or not New Orleans met those standards. Entergy New Orleans met those standards and whether or not those standards were equitably applied to Orleans Parish. Does that make sense?
I got you, council member.
And then my other question, again, talking about priority, you said the feeders were shut off 1 through 15, right? Is that what I heard?
There were 15 feeders that were impacted during the event.
Right. And so were those feeders prioritized or they're just numerical order? So for instance, were there hospitals, police stations, fire stations that were in these priorities? Like Councilmember Nguyen said, elderly housing, what are the priorities for shedding? And is there not, is it just numerical, 1 through 15?
Remember on those, there are 4 priorities. Priority 3 is mostly residential. Priority 2 is residential and commercial on the feeder. priority one would include a feeder that has some commercial, which would include like fire stations, police stations, or non-emergency medical facilities. And then priority zero would be mostly critical customers, such as emergency medical facilities, dedicated public infrastructure, water treatment, or evacuation shelters.
Great. So if we could again see all that within a mapping and how that was applied, I think would be really, really helpful. And then I guess I have the same question my other council members have in terms of timing and when y'all knew that we had to shed this. Because my other question is, I know that there was also information put out to the public to conserve and not use as much power, correct? So my question is, if we had a timing, a much more of a lead time, is it possible through conservation efforts to really reduce any type of cutoff for customers? Does it work that way? I don't know.
Is the question, Councilwoman, does conservation help obviate the need for load shedding?
Yes, and if there was enough of a time given to the public to conserve themselves proactively, does that also assist with an overall timing of a shutoff?
And I think maybe MISO can help to this as well. They can talk through, if it's necessary, of the various conservation announcements and the various public appeals that occurred prior to, but certainly that's a part of the tool that to avoid events like this. To the extent that they're effective, they do mitigate the total amount of load shed that would otherwise have been required. Ultimately, you had a combination of events. You had, whatever effect the conservation and public appeals had, but they were overwhelmed by the other steps with increasing load and loss of generation across the entire system.
I hear that. I guess what I'm asking is if there was a more of a lead up for timing to start again communicating that to the public much more in advance than what occurred, and would that have also added in less time to have a shutoff for folks?
Well, I'll say this is not an exact science. My understanding, and Darrell Brown, you'll have to jump in here, is that as they watch the demand increase relative to available generation, they make certain decisions. And so they sent several alerts to us. Some of those alerts were for conservation, some for public appeal, which is another level. And there are several levels. And they send those and we alert the public. As to the load shedding, because this hasn't happened across such a broad area for us in the last 20 years, at least, then this was a very unusual circumstance. But Darrell, I'll let you take it from there.
Okay, thank you. So the EEA2, right, which was sent out according to our MISO operating procedures, that was actually sent out the night before, right? That is when the call for public appeal and conservation takes place. So that was sent out the night before. We stayed in that EEA2 up until this event, which is what we call a Max Gen 5. And that Max Gen 5 is when the 30-minute clock starts. So in terms of the conservation and us calling on load modifying resources, LMRs we call them, all of those trick levers, I would call them, was called upon. So we did that, as well as reaching out to our neighbors. The problem is when we reached out to our neighbors, they were in the same situation that we were. So normally we could call a SPP or a Southern company for emergency purchases, but they were in the same boat and therefore they could not assist us.
All right, thank you.
Councilman Caruso?
Thank you. I guess, can we start off on this slide to help me out a little bit? It had first, breaker open, talks about the Sewage and Water Board. How many total breakers were opened on the night of the 16th?
15 in total.
15?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And how much power is supplied through each breaker, or do we know that at this point?
I know most of our breakers, a lot of our breakers are rated for 1200 amps.
For 1200?
Yeah, but it would depend on the usage and what was flowing that night.
And I guess the reason why I'm asking that question is, will the number of breakers indicate then how much power was shed?
I don't know if you could just, if that could be a rough cut that you could say, hey, 15 breakers equals this amount.
And
because remember, yeah, you're looking at the load that was actually flowing, because let's say there was it could have taken 16 breakers, just depending on the load. So fortunately for what the load that was needed, it only amounted to the 15 breakers, which is why it stopped at 15.
Right, but I guess my question is, for back of the envelope purposes, if you know there are 15 breakers, do we know that equals 26 megawatts, 50 megawatts, 75 megawatts, 85 megawatts? I mean, certainly breaker has to have some sort of approximation to how much power is shed, right?
Yeah. And I don't have that right now, council member.
I think
Council member, is your question whether or not we have the same amount of load on every breaker?
Well, I guess
because the answer is no.
Okay, that's yeah, David. I think that's part of my question. Is the load the same? And then really, again, because we are not engineers, does it also mean if you have 15 open, then you can have a rough justice estimate of how many megawatts were shed as a result?
No, sir. The rating, as John mentioned earlier, if you're just looking at it purely on it being rated for 1200 amps, that in no way tells us how much you have flowing through that breaker. And so it varies from breaker to breaker, from substation to substation.
Okay. And then, Mr. Hawkins, you've explained a couple of times about how there's different priority levels, depending whether you're priority 1, priority 0, whether you're a hospital or first responder. Here's my question. Before February the 16th, when was the last time Sewage and Water Board and Entergy discussed their power and the breakers that they would need for power or water purposes?
As it relates to that list, or just in general?
As it relates to the list.
As it relates to the list, I don't know that there was a discussion. I would have to verify that to see if there was an actual discussion with Sewage and Water Board regarding that list.
Yeah, I'd like to know the answer to that too, please, because to me, it seems like it's a two-way street. I don't want to put all the burden on one utility, but it seems like everybody needs to be communicating with each other about what the needs are. And because of Turbine 4 or 5 being down or other issues, I just want to make sure that Sewage and Water Board's also telling you what their needs are too.
Understood.
All right, and then members, I think I'm also just going to make an executive decision too. I know there's more that we want to do to plumb this issue of the power on the 16th. I think what I'd like to do for the Public Works members is hold in abeyance till March 18th, most of the topics of the quarterly report, so we can feel like we adequately get through what we need to get through on the power issues. And then we'll circle back to some of the other issues on the 18th. And if anybody has an objection to that, let me know. But I'm thinking it's a better use of all of our time, and then we won't be here all day, and we won't give short shrift to other issues, I think, that are really important as well. But with that, Councilmember Moreno, I think my questions for now are answered, subject to, I know there's more slides on communication, and I know we have some public comment too.
Yeah, I mean, on the communication, we talked a lot about it already. We know that there were problems. I don't need to see the rest of the slide unless other council members think that they need to really copies of it. I just want to say this though, I think that this investigation that we're launching by the advisor is important. My real concern here is, I'm still trying to figure out exactly how the setting happened. And I worry that the city of New Orleans, that the New Orleans customers just had to bear the brunt, or much larger portion that they needed to, of the all statewide shedding, which was 200 megawatts. And, you know, that is incredibly unfair if that happened. If other areas that were supposed to have more load shed, you know, that if that did not occur and New Orleans took a much bigger brunt, 3 times than what was, that's going to be downright shameful. So, you know, I look forward to what this investigation revealed, and I'm going to direct the advisors to work as quickly as possible. Aaron and Clint will work on the resolution. Council members, please provide any input that on what you need in the resolution to Aaron, and that will be on the agenda. Looks like I'll have to do it on suspension on Thursday. Just wanted to make sure everybody was aware of just the game plan. Thank you, Councilmember Drew. So I turn it back over to you.
All right, thank you, Councilmember Moreno. I guess while we have Sewage and Water Board on the line and this slide is up, Ghassan, can you talk a little bit about the impact of losing the breaker, and I guess secondly, the communication before this on ensuring that power isn't lost, and then I guess 3, future plans for communication, because I think everybody wants to make sure our top priorities and assets are protected. And I know Sewage and Water Board, I think, is the biggest customer of Entergy, right?
So thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll start with the first question relative to the impact, and I have to quantify it by saying it was minimal. Thanks in large part to our preparation work that obviously our, Bob Turner and his staff anticipated a lot of these scenarios from happening. Specific to what happened on that night, we lost one feeder that really impacted 2 things. And this is in the context of drinking water, in terms of the raw water intake, the treatment part, and the actual pumping of the water to people's homes. So this particular feeder impacted a Hamilton station, which powers not only one of the raw water intake pumping ability to feed our facility to treat the water, but it also impacted the actual ability to pump chemicals that we need for treating and purify the water to make it drinkable. In this case, we had a generator that was on standby, and that's part of our resilience and redundant system that we were able to switch over to allow the operation to resume. In that time span that took us to switch over from Entergy to the generator, we were able to rely on the reserve amount of water that we had in our in the clear well to maintain the pressure in the system. So and at the end, within about an hour worth of time, we were able to resume that and maintain pressure, and then make up the lost water that was used from the reserve. In terms of the advanced notification and communication, I think we do very well as a team from our end, communicating with Entergy on constant basis. They understand our needs. We've a while ago, actually, we sat down and assessed all the feeders that Entergy provides us, looked at redundancies, looked at hardening. We talked about a lot of things in terms of improving the current system, and I think we're doing fairly well in that regard. We were obviously working on the assumption that we would be made a priority, and we had no reason to doubt that, and I still don't. Moving forward, I think post this event, the main focus of the communication and the conversation that's been going on between myself, Mr. Ellis, and our teams, respective teams, has been the advanced communication, because that really was the biggest issue for us is that kind of out of nowhere, we lost power. Had we known we were going to lose power, we would have taken a little bit more, obviously preparation and did the transfer and reduce the amount of downtime to a minimum. So I think moving forward, clearly everybody recognizes the need for better communication and advanced communication. And then one more very critical, I think, lessons learned or improvement moving forward is that David had committed to identify the feeders that come to serve the Sewage and Water Board and preclude them from any future shedding if that is needed. So hopefully that answers your question.
I think it partially answers the question, Ghassan. I guess my question now is, given what has happened, is Sewage and Water Board preparing a list for Entergy that says not only obviously all feeders are critical, but these are more critical in terms of its operations, to make sure that, you're not caught off guard again. And also, in fairness, I think that Sewage and Water Board is proactively communicating with Entergy as well.
Right. The immediate communication was to identify all the key feeders that we rely on from Entergy, and they've clearly identified the same ones. So there's a consistent understanding of what those feeders are and where they are and how critical they are. I think we are in a better place, and then we will cement that understanding with continued communication. I know that night specifically, Bob Turner and Entergy representatives were communicating, identifying the feeders that are not to be touched that night, and obviously the subsequent nights. So again, we will have to bring that to close the loop and make sure that we're all on the same page in terms of all the feeders that we need to be protected are protected.
And I guess, Ghassan, just so we're all on the same page, when do you anticipate being able to have that done? Because I think so much of this is we don't want anybody caught by surprise. I mean, obviously, first and foremost, we don't want customers caught by surprise. But in addition to that, we don't want to make sure Entergy or Sewage and Water Board is. So when do you think, the next couple of weeks, there can be a clear identification to make sure that both utilities are on the same page?
2 weeks or earlier even. I think that those are, like I said, have been identified. We just have to put them on a memo and just make sure that both parties have that same memo. So we're consistent and we're accurate.
All right. And then I don't know if Mr. Hawkins is still on the line, or the right person to ask this question too. But given what we know now, is Sewage and Water Board been added, I guess, to priority 1 list? And then when they give you the feeder list, will the most important feeders be added to priority 0 as the most significant? And if I have my terminology wrong, let me know.
You got it right, council member. Yeah, they will, once we get that information and just align on it, and we've already reviewed, they will be added to that priority 0. So they will not be on the load shed list. Okay.
I know nobody wants to be shed, period. And obviously we have a lot more work to do as the regulator going forward. But I think it's really important for everybody to say out loud, understand, agree that Sewage and Water Board is a priority 0 because of the functions that they provide, and to make sure that their most critical feeders are protected. All right. I guess Ghassan,
Joe?
To your statement, I'll also say out loud that they are priority 0. They are a critical resource, and we see them as such.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is related but not direct, but it's all intertwined here together. Ghassan, what's happening with T4 and T5, and because all of this stuff is integrated. So we've been dealing with that for a long time. So help me with that. Where are we with the 2 of them?
Hey, can I ask you for a break for a second so we can take this presentation down And Paul, do you mind just pulling up that slide? Jay, you're stealing my thunder because that's where I was headed next. But I just want to make sure we get the slide up. You know, we're on the same page. Get the slide up so we can see what's going on, because it's a great question, and I think people ought to be able to see that. So can you
I
just
didn't have a slide, man. You know, sorry.
I mean, you know,
Councilman Caruso, may I just make a statement? It feels like we're shifting to more sewage and water board specific discussion. I just want to thank you and all of the council members and Chairwoman Marino for this meeting today. This is how we identify problems or areas for improvement. We will be transparent with any investigation that is performed. We'll work with the advisors and we'll continue our work with the Sewage and Water Board. And again, thank you for the questions and the line of discussion.
thank you, Mr. Ellis. Yeah, I think you're right. I think what I'd like to do is shift to the questions that Jay really asked to show what's sort of coming up in short order on the power side, and then hold the meeting over until March 18th for some of the other issues sort of in the quarterly report, maybe even some updates on power as well then too. All right, were we able to get the Sewage and Water Board report up, please? Thanks, Paul. And I don't know if it's the second or the third slide. That's it. Perfect. Thank you very much. All right, Hassan.
Yeah, thank you again, Mr. Chairman and Councilman Banks for asking the question. So before I talk about T4 and T5, which are very, very crucial topics, obviously, I want to explain that where we are today, and I've used this term before, you know, we have a very fragile system as a whole, and today the system is even more fragile. And the reason I say that is because T4 and T5 are both down. And we are working very diligently and very hard to bring those back in operation right before the hurricane season. As you can see, T4 is slated to be back in service on May 3rd or the week of May 3rd, and T5 is the week of June 14th. Those are very aggressive but very attainable dates. We hold regular progress meetings to make sure that everybody who's involved is on track and remains very focused and committed to bringing those two very significant machines back in service. But where we currently stand today is we are relying on Turbine 1, which is, you know, before the T4, when T4 and T5 were operational, T1 was a backup really, but now it's the frontline turbine that we are heavily relying on, and it's a very fragile machine. I have to be very clear that we have no choice but to use it, but it's not a very solid turbine. It's old. We've been patching it, not investing a lot of money in it for good reasons, but now it's really the go-to turbine. We also have the 5 EMDs that have become, again, frontline pieces of equipment, power generation, and we rely now significantly on the frequency changer that we have at Carrollton to utilize Entergy power to power some of our 25 hertz equipment by obviously converting it from 60 to 25. The cold weather obviously brings new sets of challenges in addition to the challenges I just mentioned, which is the fact that T6, which is a fairly new and reliable machine, is not very accessible or usable in colder temperatures. That's why this past event was so crucial, because had we lost Entergy completely, we could not have stood up T6 to offset that loss, which is what we typically do. So T6 basically is a backup for Entergy. And that was not the case. We were deprived of that opportunity, so we couldn't have used it. So in general, we are in a very fragile state. We have almost no redundancy at all for generating power to equip both drainage pumps as well as potable pumps, as well as some of the raw water intake. So we have a period of time until May where we are extremely cautious. We are trying to be as proactive as possible, looking at all the possible scenarios and try to anticipate and proactively stay ahead of what may go wrong. We're not going to be perfect, and some things will go wrong, but it is where we are today. And I mean, I couldn't really describe the remarkable work that Bob and his team do every day in terms of anticipating the issues. For example, they're working on the boiler room today to do some proactive or preemptive maintenance to valves and other parts that are susceptible to breaking, to make sure that that boiler room is able to generate steam to be able to run T1 and obviously later on T4 when it comes into operation. So that's the timeline on top. Obviously, that's the immediate or near term that is very concerning. The long term, prospect is definitely much more optimistic and positive, and I think we're on track, more very key components in terms of putting us where we need to be, whether it's building the substation and bringing a more hardened system. I mean, I don't have to tell any of you that that is a crucial piece, but the road there is obviously preparing the site for it, which is on track, moving very, very forward, progressing very nicely. The frequency changer that we have been working on purchasing, that's moving forward and due sometime in 2022. And obviously the T7 that we're all looking forward to commissioning sometime in 2023. So that's pretty much like the overall status report of where we are with power, and I'm sure you have more questions and I'm happy to entertain them.
Hassan, I just want to make sure that I understood you, and I want the public to be clear. With Entergy shut down, we did not have the capability of generating the power that we needed. I want you to be clear on that. Did I hear you say that?
No, if you're speaking to the actual pre-Mardi Gras or the Mardi Gras night, there was a very limited loss of power. It was one feeder that fed two crucial or critical pieces of infrastructure. One is the actual pumping of the raw water at New River Station, we call it, that allow us to bring water from the river and treat it. But additional to that, we lost power to the chemical injection or pumping ability. So we couldn't, even if we could pump water, raw water, we couldn't have the chemicals to be injected to treat the water. So our water treatment process came to a halt until we were able to move over to the generator and then allow us to restore power and start operation again. So it was not a global loss from Entergy. It was one specific feeder to Hamilton Station.
This just illustrates how fortunate we are that this wasn't much worse than it could have been, and the fact that we have to be intentional on finding a much more reliable and sustainable power source to keep the water system working.
Absolutely.
So that is something everybody needs to be focused on, because we are dancing on the edge. Now we're about to go into the rainy season. I mean, nobody expected us to have a problem in winter, but right now we're getting the springtime in New Orleans. And then after that, you get the hurricane season in New Orleans. So everybody needs to be concerned, because we've got to get a far more stable, reliable source so that we don't continue to dance on the edge.
Absolutely. That night could have been a lot worse had we lost more of a wholesale power, because again, we rely so much on Entergy to power some of our potable water pumping, and if that had halted, really we had limited redundancy to stand those back up. And we would have been relying solely on T1 and the MDs to power the 25 hertz pumps, which would have been also very fragile because that goes down and then there's no drinking water for the city.
And we look like Dallas and the rest of those places that are going through that hard they're going through. So look, God is good. I'm glad that didn't happen, but I think that was a warning. And it's a warning that we all need to be very intentional on making sure that that doesn't happen here.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Banks. Gassan, before I see if any of my colleagues have any questions, I just want to ask some nitpicky questions here about the return of turbines 4 and 5. The words return to service, does that mean they'll be able to power up? I just want to make sure what that means first.
Yeah, certainly those words mean exactly what they look like. That means T4 will be providing power the week of May 3rd. So returning to service that means it will become the 20 megawatt that it provides, or plus or minus, will be available to us on that day or that week.
Great. And then just sort of going in reverse order here, turbine 6 weatherizing complete by mid-April. That simply means T6 can run in degrees less than 45 or 42 when we haven't had the capacity to be able to do that in the past, right?
Yes, sir. It would become available at any temperature all year round. Yes.
Okay. And then for turbine 4 and 5, if you want to handle them both, the nameplate power is 20 megawatts. Does that mean when they're returned to service, we'll have 40 megawatts total? Or sort of as discussed, there's going to be some care there because we don't want to push them to the limits?
Yeah, again, the 20 is the nameplate. Truthfully, we never get 20 megawatts out of either of the machines. If you recall, we had some issue with the T4 where we had set the 18 megawatt limit and that was stripped. And then, as a consequence to that, we lowered the max to 17. So now we're gonna obviously look at the refurbishment, the new parts, and I don't know if it's gonna impact our decision to maintaining that lower threshold. So 20 is a nameplate, but again, what we get out of it is closer to 17 or 18.
Okay, and so I think that's important because, as Councilmember Banks is alluding to, and you've said, there isn't a ton of redundancy available, but when these two come back online by mid-June, it will increase, essentially power from, I guess, 53 or 54 megawatts to maybe adding another 34 or 35 megawatts worth of power. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely. We'll be back close to, in the 75 to 80 megawatt available power. Yes.
Okay. I just want to make sure that we're being clear numbers about that. I know it gets a little bit into the details, but I think that's important. And then I think you did a good job explaining the long-term power timeline. My thought, Gassan, is we come back maybe in March and talk about that a little bit more and spend more time there, because I do think you point out the substation is being complete in terms of the site construction, and there's work being done on substation completion and also T7 commissioning in I guess a little over 2 years. So that's something I think that merits discussion as well. But I think for people headed into hurricane season, the headline is 34 to 35 megawatts of power is being restored. And then Gassan, in addition to that, there also are going to be engineers, right, on site or people associated with engineering companies to help manage at least T4 or maybe T5, as well as part of the of supervision and maintenance.
Absolutely. The companies that are involved with the refurbishment or the repairs will also be on site almost immediately. I mean, we have a crucial period coming, now up to May So that obviously their presence is going to be crucial to allow us to be a little bit more responsive. But one thing we're adding to improving how we do things is, putting on paper standard operating procedures, doing more training that these folks will bring to the table to allow our own staffing to be more responsive, more proactive, and reduce any chances of failure in the future. So that's going to be a very key and new step that we're implementing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's important because, you had 5 that blew and 4 that tripped. I think it's also important to recognize that while there's expertise inside the walls at Sewage and Water Board, having people who maybe helped with either the design or maintenance of this equipment can be on site to help make sure that it's being nursed in the early stages is incredibly important.
Absolutely, absolutely.
All right, I think colleagues, unless anybody has any other questions, we're approaching the 2-hour mark. Yes, Councilmember Glapia.
How you doing? So I know this is off topic, but can't have Sewage and Water Board here and not ask this question because we're getting calls daily about bills. And so I'm just curious if there's something happening with kind of getting corrections on customer bills. Tell me what's happening with customer bills.
Yeah, thank you. And that was a main topic of discussion today. And we have a couple slides that we prepared. But in general, we have recognized the importance of the billing situation. We know it's a front and center. We know it's probably the most crucial item on our agenda, to be honest with you, next to power. And we're addressing it on a daily basis. We're addressing it short term. We're addressing it long term. We're breaking down the process from the actual meter reading to actual producing the bill, how we investigate any disputed accounts, and there's just the whole gamut of how we can improve our dealings and how can we be fair and upfront with our customers in general. And the big picture and the long term is obviously to bring to the city a new smart meter system that would allow us to be timely and accurate. That process has started. We're putting the RFP together. We're doing surveys of some of our meters to allow us to put a very solid RFP for furnish and install, which hopefully will start at the beginning of 2022. That would be we know that is the ultimate solution to what I've been calling it as a antiquated and flawed system that we have or process in terms of relying on reading 136,000 meters every month, and which causes a lot of issues. We're forced to estimate a lot of bills and just a plethora of issues that we've been managing through that process. So
speaking of that, do we know the percentages of what's being estimated versus actual reading now, presently?
We are reading close to 65% of the meters. We had reached over 80% at one point, and then 2022 was a bad year because of the COVID and the impact it had on our staff. It set us back very significantly. We've done we've taken a lot of steps since to improve on that. We're bringing about 25 new meter readers to maximize that capacity. So we will be at 60 at next couple months, 60 readers. So we're focusing on that capacity, not only quantitatively but also the quality of the reads. So we have minimal amount of estimates that we produce every month.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Palmer.
Councilmember Glapion, and thank you for bringing that up. Ghassan, thank you for being here. These are going to be general comments because I'm looking at the next slide that says customer service, where we are. This one and the finance snapshot. I just think these are inadequate slides. And if we're really talking about improving customer service, I think we need numbers. We need to know the percentages, how many people are being automatically read, how many are being estimated, just like Councilman Glapion said, but I want to see actual numbers and then what the goal is. So we can track this every month or every time that there's a public works meeting and see where we are. I also would like to see how many requests for new service connections you get, both from the commercial side and the residential side, and then how long it takes to hook up those commercial and those residential requests. I really want to see hard data on this to track the efficiency of it. I'd like to see the number of, you can talk about the number of disputes. I want to know the number of disputes. I want to know the average length of time it gets to satisfy a dispute. I would also like to see, again, at the actual numbers of the automated reading versus the meter readings and the averaging. I think that's really important. And then I would also like to see a whole section on accounts receivable. I'd like to see what are the largest accounts out there that have not been collected upon, how much money you have outstanding, and how it's, you know, how we're working towards it. I'd like to actually work with Councilmember Giarrusso on this, because to me, this is really, really important. I'm consistently fielding calls about people fed up with this city in terms of just getting basic requests, getting house hookups, et cetera. I really want to explore putting somebody embedded from Sewage and Water Board in safety and permits, and also somebody from Entergy in safety and permits. We have got to start focusing on customer service. It should not be so hard to live in this city. And I think we're losing the basics. I know I hate talking about this when you were showing us, you know, the big picture and all the things that you're doing. And I know you've inherited a really broken system on so many fronts, but I think you're absolutely right. If we don't start focusing on the customer service aspect, no one is going to trust or want to give Sewage and Water Board more money because they think it's just, you know, it's not being utilized correctly. So I really want to focus on the customer service side and how we can provide better service to the citizens. For instance, just so you know, like I had a constituent, it took 6 months to get a new house hooked up to Sewage and Water Board. And when we called Sewage and Water Board, they told us it was because the contract for getting this hooked up was going to $1 million contract and they had to wait on the city to sign the contract. It made no sense whatsoever that you would have these small jobs waiting on larger jobs in order to hook up water lines, you know, and that's ridiculous that somebody would have to wait 6 months to connect their home, a new construction, which is another customer, which is another tax base, another taxpayer for the city of New Orleans, 6 months to be able to move into their house because they were waiting on Sewage and Water Board. So these are, you know, and I have dozens more of these examples. And I really think that if we have a matrix that comes out, Councilmember Giarrusso, every month that tracks these, and I think would also show confidence to the consumer that we're paying attention to their problems.
May I respond?
Yes, please. I'm sorry.
No, a lot of very, very good questions, very great suggestions. Just a couple remarks. I think much of what you've asked for is included in the actual report that we've provided the committee. There are other things that you've requested and they are either available and we will definitely gather that information and make them available to you. I do want you to know that obviously, you know, I report to board of directors on a monthly basis, and much of what you asked, the matrix and some of the quantitative improvement that we're doing is reported on, and happy to share those reports with city councils who are interested. We are trying to hold ourselves accountable in a quantitative fashion. So I appreciate all your feedback. And lastly, I do want you to know that evident by the fact that we have created a customer service unit that didn't exist in this utility. It took us a while because of the variety of reasons, but we now have a a customer service department that is headed by a new chief customer service officer, whom I believe some of you have met, Renee Gonzalez. And that is a testimony to the fact that we know that customer service in this utility has suffered in the past, and we want to make it front and center. We make it a priority. And if this is not an evidence of that, I don't know what is. Much work needs to be done. Obviously, Renee's obviously uncovering all sorts of challenges every day. He's got his obviously day split between fixing things on daily basis, but at the same time drawing us a big map for what we need to look like as a utility from a customer's perspective. So it will be a while. Obviously, it's going to take some time to come up with not only with a plan, but and enjoy some of the fruit of those plans. But we know and recognize that the angst that we are creating to our customers, and then I know you hear it every day. So I very much appreciate all the feedback that you provided me today.
Thank you. And Councilmember Druso just texted me that some of this information is available, and I appreciate that you said to the board, maybe we really do need a like a dashboard that is very public facing, and also that is communicated to all the council members monthly, so we can see progress. I think we know we didn't get here overnight, Ghassan, and I know you've been doing a tremendous job in really trying to make this a sustainable utility. But I just do think that we also need to start publicly facing where we are and how we get to where we need to be.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more.
Thank you.
Councilmember Nguyen.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And Ghassan, I just wanted to jump in, and I know I've been in communication with you and your leadership team in reference to numerous concerns around billing, and I did meet with Renee and his team. So I really appreciate the effort that is put forth to address a lot of the billing issues that are facing in District E. But I also wanted to bring this up to you in reference to running water hydrant in neighborhoods, particularly in my district, where we have a good number of water hydrants that continues to run and is reported to Sewage and Water Board. For whatever reason, that running water hydrant is still happening. And I don't know, I'm thinking like, why can't Sewage and Water Board just come out and turn off the water meter to prevent it from running? Because as Councilmember Palmer indicated, it is about customer service. So when issues like this are reported and Sewage and Water Board are not addressing it, it gives the customer a sense of feeling that Sewage and Water Board are very wasteful, wasting city resources. And then not only that, but you're damaging the look of the neighborhood when there's pot of waters. I'm pretty sure, and I had to share this statement with Renee's team yesterday. I'm pretty sure if there was a running water hydrant in your neighborhood, you would make sure that that running hydrant is stopped or addressed, and that running water is not happening. But it's not, I'm not seeing that in District E. In the East, we have, like as I stated, several water hydrant has been reported. I believe after being aggressive with this water hydrant, we finally received an email from Courtney that the 16,000 block of Chef, the water hydrant is going to be addressed this week. And I appreciate that, but it's like a pond out there, and we should not have to wait. Residents do not have to wait until their neighborhood looks like that until something happened. And again, this looks really bad in reference to Sewage and Water Board, in reference to customer service, and like I say, if this is happening in your neighborhood, I'm pretty sure you'll make sure that it's addressed right away. And so again, I am very optimistic. I continue to work with you guys as partners to address many of the concern. I agree with my colleagues that a lot of these issues has been happening for decades. We got to end this madness, Ghassan. We just have to end this madness with this estimation. It's crazy. I remember first coming into city council 2.5 years ago, this was brought up. And 2.5 years later, we're still dealing with the same issue. And people want to pay their bill, but they're not going to pay their bill if they're not being treated fairly. You know, people should not pay for something that they did not actually use. And because if there's shortage with Sewage and Water Board, I really believe that something has to step up to address the reader meter. We spoke at length yesterday with Renee team in reference to strategy. But again, you know, I'm going to continue to push hard on this this billing issue as well as this water hydrant issue, because it's getting out of control in the East and it needs to be addressed. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the feedback. Those are two very key and priority issues for us. And again, we can talk offline, but we are working very hard on addressing both. And we will continue to do better and better on behalf of our customers.
Thank you, Councilmember Nguyen. I think Ghassan, you know, the walkaway that I've heard from all the colleagues is bills and infrastructure issues continue to be problematic, frankly, and that people are looking for additional detail. And look, I think, you know, Jay has said this repeatedly. Kristen brought it up. We did not create the system. You were not here for the decades. The system was neglected, but we inherited it. And so now it's about how we get that fixed on. And I know that Renee's been on the job for a limited period of time, and that he's kind of done undercover boss and tried to examine the bills without knowing who he is and has processes. But I think for the next meeting, given that we have now, you know, essentially a full month, and he'll have some more feet under him, getting some more detail about what's being fixed, how it's being fixed in the billing, and the same thing true on the infrastructure side, just getting some detail on timelines in particular, maybe reporting as well to make sure we all know where we stand would be appreciated.
Absolutely.
All right. Unless any Councilmember Brissette, do you have a comment? All right. All right. So what I think I'm going to do is this. Oh, you got a comment?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I was on mute.
All right. I did it earlier.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman of Public Works, and thank you, Madam Chair of Utilities. This is, since we're wrapping up, I know much has been discussed. You know, I really am appalled to hear the lack of answers from Entergy New Orleans as it relates to the role of the blackouts on Mardi Gras evening. The questions posed to the utility since that night by my colleagues. I know they received the email from me that night regarding the particular neighborhoods and what method did they choose to pick those neighborhoods to be shut off during that time, and to learn just today in a public meeting, which is totally unacceptable as the regulator, to learn that we had to shed more load than needed, that brought pain, I would say, and inconvenience amongst our businesses and residents. And I would tell you that it always seems like multiple neighborhoods throughout my district, knowing that many neighborhoods throughout the city were touched, from Central City, Edgewood Park, Florida Desire in my district, as well as Burbank Gardens, and other locations in districts D, I know in New Orleans East, and there was a spot in Algiers, and then over in Lakeview that also had the outage. And what the people are owed is communication, a simple level of communication, as they are the ratepayers, and we as the regulators are due that information. And so I want to reiterate to Mr. Ellis that they need to provide us with the information as soon as possible. We had a committee called by the chairman and chairwoman for a reason this morning, and that's to get the answers that the citizens of the city deserve. And as I'm sitting here and observing the answers and lack thereof, my opinion is that this by far is one of the lowest performance of Entergy New Orleans that I have ever seen, and it's unacceptable. You all should be prepared. I know, and many of us know, that this was a event that was unprecedented, and blackouts may have not happened since the year 2000. But we're a day and age where technology has advanced, and we expect more from you and your performance, and we did not see that today. And so I'm not pleased. I'm glad to hear the chairwoman announce the prudence investigation. The last one was in 2017 with the reliability issue I initiated with the fair weather days, and power outages continue to go out. And I want the public to know, and the utility to take seriously, that based on whatever the prudence investigation results find, it is up to this body as the regulator. Fines are potentially on the table. And so I'll just end it there, and I look forward, like my colleagues, to having those answers answered as we stated earlier. So thank you, Mr. Chairman DeRusso, and thank you, Madam Chair, President Moreno, for calling these meetings.
Thank you, Councilmember Brissett. So I guess the walk away from today's meetings are three things. One, that Chair Moreno will initiate an investigation of Entergy regarding the events of February 16th. Two, that Sewage and Water Board has been confirmed to be a priority customer for emergencies, and their power will not be shut off. And then three, that Sewage and Water Board has turbines 4 and 5 coming back online before hurricane season, giving them a significant boost. And I guess really 4, that we're going to come back on March 18th to discuss billing, finances, and infrastructure issues in some more detail. So with that, I have a few comments to read, and I actually have one additional one that somebody sent me as well. That will be the last one. I guess, Ms. Spears, can I ask you a favor? There's a couple of them that look a little bit longer than the others. And so if I get over the 2-minute mark, will you just let me know?
Got you, council member.
Thank you. All right, number 1 from Merle Harris, not being paid. I'm concerned about the lack of care that Entergy is taking of the poles carrying the electricity. Where are there electricity outages? How many were caused due to poles falling or problems with poles? Many poles in the city are leaning and are now supported by 2 or 3 other wooden poles, parts of poles, or metal pieces. Please ask Entergy to do a better job of pole maintenance. Number 2, Emmanuel Seguera, not paid. I believe that direct relief to ratepayers, an adoption of a climate resilience plan, and a more resilient transmission grid in the face of extreme weather. Seeing what is happening in Texas is terrifying. People froze to death in their own apartments. It's only a matter of time when Louisiana will experience something similar. Number 3, Dawn Hebert. As a ratepayer, I question how certain areas in Orleans Parish experienced rolling, cascading outages with no notification. Although I've been receiving text messages from Entergy last week to lower my energy usage, I find it odd that notifications of outages could not have been sent to affected ratepayers. In addition, how are these areas chosen for the outages? The Entergy gas power plant New Orleans East was supposedly built to address high usage periods. What happened? Why did the plant not live up to its full potential? In addition, was notification provided to ratepayers informing them of a new charge on their bill starting last November? Was December, January's temperature really that low to account for a higher usage compared to last year? Has any notification been given to ratepayers regarding last week's cold weather and its effect on their bills? Did Sewage and Water Board notify their customers of a compromised water system? One of the roles of a regulatory body is to serve and protect the public interest with respect to the exercise of a profession, professional governance, and the conduct of registrants. Entergy's conduct requires constant governance and protection of ratepayers. Thank you. Number 4, Joseph Cologne. Entergy has shown itself year after year as a for-profit corporation and nothing more. It's time for the council to stop treating them as a neutral player and as the unequal power player they are. Use your power as regulators to ensure that they support cooperative transmission planning, adopt Alliance for Affordable Energy's climate resilience plan, provide direct relief for ratepayers, and eventually end their local franchise and municipalize Entergy so they finally and truly accountable to the people. Number 5, Ben Gordon. Do you think the power outages in Louisiana and Texas have some connection to the privatization of utilities and deregulation efforts by corporations in recent history? Number 6, Matthew Wilson. Entergy should not be allowed to make extra profit when the weather is bad. My energy bill is 4 times higher than it's ever been before because of this arbitrary rate hike. Municipalize Entergy. Number 7, Ann Meyer. I would like to thank council members for working towards greater transparency and relationships with utility providers. Please continue and increase your diligent auditing of the behavior and financials of these providers. Gaining understanding of long-range plans for sustainable power and water sewer is vital to the well-being of our community. The positive financial impacts of jobs created by working toward a healthier, greener future will benefit all of our neighborhoods and the families that live here. Number 8, Brooke Randolph. For the immediate benefit of the people of New Orleans and future weather moments, it is imperative that we move quickly to wind and other forms of renewable energy. Entergy and our own council seem to be resisting these much-needed changes. From my understanding, renewables are much more compatible with storage. The idea of massive grids was brilliant in its day, but clearly it did not work well for Texas and most of the country. The time is ripe. We need to ditch and not build more of the old-fashioned power plants. We need to move into the 21st century. Number 9, Andy Kowalczyk. Good morning, Council, and thank you for holding the special joint meeting to address the many issues impacting the electric and water infrastructure of the city last week. Full disclosure, I'm an independent consultant working with the Energy Foundation on issues throughout MISO South, as well as a MISO stakeholder in the environmental sector. I'm not being compensated for my comments, and I was not asked to speak on behalf of either of these entities. Let me just start by saying that accountability in these special meetings being held by the council are only important if they produce results. This is the second meeting about the negative impacts from the Entergy New Orleans services to customers in a month. Whatever the desired result is of these meetings, there needs to be a plan for how to maintain reliable and affordable electricity service for the city. There also needs to be accountability. Although there are a million takes on Twitter about how Texas and ERCOT could have planned better, or how MISO and SPP could have planned better, the truth is that MISO transmission planning is a stakeholder-driven process. The City Council is a stakeholder in this process. Actually, everyone in the MISO territory is technically and can participate in regular MISO meetings. However, it's important for decision makers in states and cities like New Orleans to provide input on what their system needs are, since the position affords them greater regulatory authority over the system. It's no secret that MISO North was better equipped for the storm in the south. Power from the eastern seam with PJM was much easier to access than power from MISO North to the south. Additionally, my colleagues and I that engage regularly in MISO stakeholder process took generous screen caps of MISO's real-time LMP contour map throughout the crisis last week and saw a number of examples where load pockets indicating deep purple persisted for hours at a time. In these areas, there was significant power capacity online.
Remember, that's 2 minutes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
10, Brent Newman. Good morning, members of the council. The National Audubon Society would like to commend the council for taking swift action to provide a public forum to discuss the concerns of Orleans Parish residents, following the recent extreme weather events and concerns about energy reliability. We'd like to encourage the council to continue this proactive, responsible oversight for the benefit of Orleans Parish residents to all aspects of utility management, operation, and planning processes. The council has ample opportunity to build a cleaner, more equitable, and more resilient New Orleans through a more critical and comprehensive approach to the current integrated resource planning process, through the enactment of the Renewable Portfolio Standard, and through an honest and critical assessment of the energy generation portfolio of the competitive market in our unique situation where I think I skipped a line, and critical assessment of the energy generation portfolio of energy and associated costs for New Orleanians. As we have mentioned in prior public comments, the council's regulation of energy is intended to serve as a proxy for the competitive market in our unique situation where energy has a monopoly on customers and services. We ask that the council assume that role with a thorough and comprehensive eye to all aspects of energy's operations which affect the well-being and daily life of our residents, with an eye to a more efficient, resilient, and effective management of our valuable resources moving forward. The impact of climate change are ever present for our city, and we can see these impacts becoming more challenging in real time. We've seen that the impacts are the most severe for the most vulnerable among us. As utilities regulator, the council must act in the public interest. This includes ensuring the utility provides service has the management and skills and organization necessary to provide services in the most efficient and affordable way for the benefit of the citizens of New Orleans. We believe it is appropriate and would recommend the council order Energy New Orleans to fund an independently conducted.
That's 2 minutes, council member.
Thank you. 3 more comments. Monique Harden on behalf of Deep South Center for Environmental Justice. The Texas power outage caused people to die and millions more to suffer in freezing temperatures without heat and drinking water. The reported cause of this disaster is the deregulation of the energy system. This special meeting follows another special meeting a few weeks ago that focused on the spike of energy bills. At that prior meeting, energy executives repeatedly called the city council a partner and several times described its relationship with the council as a partnership. That would mean the city council was Energy's partner in bill increases, which is not only ridiculous, but contrary to law. Our home rule charter empowers the city council as a governmental body to supervise, regulate, and control energy as a public utility. A supervisor is not a partner. A regulator is not a partner. To say otherwise means that Energy New Orleans, like ERCOT in Texas, would be deregulated. The Deep South Center for Environmental Justice calls on council members to take an important step of correcting energy executives when they call you a partner to remind the company that you are the regulator. We further call on council members to commit to 4 regulatory actions to protect New Orleans residents. Number 1, conducting a management audit of energy to identify cost savings, recommend efficient operations to improve service, evaluate progress on energy efficient renewables, and review compliance with city council orders, which include requirements for storm hardening the system. Number 2, making a commitment to reduce energy bills that rank New Orleans second in the nation for highest electric costs on low-income families. Number 3, requiring Energy to provide sufficient notice for energy conservation to avoid an emergency blackout. In the event of a blackout, regulate the steps Energy must take to avoid critical facilities like the Sewage and Water Board treatment plant and protect our most vulnerable residents. And 4, opening investigation on energy bill spikes as there remain.
2 minutes, council member.
All right, I'm just going to finish once it's almost done. Remain unanswered questions as to how a 41% increase in use, according to Energy statement, resulted in bill increases of 230%. Thank you for your attention. The penultimate comment is by Logan Burke, the Alliance for Affordable Energy. Thank you to the council for taking this issue seriously. Here again, we have extreme weather telling us it's well past time to act. While most New Orleanians maintain access to all utilities during the recent storm, the lack of communication, planning, and impact to certain neighborhoods and even our critical water infrastructure underscore the need for real climate planning. The council has begun the steps to take climate action to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions, but this is only half of the work needed. The other half is to prepare our city and citizens for the impacts of climate change that are already here and are worsening. The systems that got us to this point are no longer the ones that will carry us safely through a severely compromised climate. Instead, all of our utilities must work together with health and safety as the primary goal to plan for services that are responsive to colder winters, hotter summers, and worsening storms. Regulators in other jurisdictions have begun directing utilities to develop climate resilience plans that marry distribution planning and resource planning. This is one reason the Alliance began in 2016 recommending resilience planning along the IRP. This is a reason the Entergy Future New Orleans Coalition has consistently urged Council to require holistic utility planning through a resilient renewable portfolio standard. Weatherizing a fossil fuel plant only ensures the fossil generation costs more and perhaps can withstand extreme cold. Instead, let's discuss how to focus our homes and neighborhoods where we can invest in weatherization, battery backup, and distributed generation to reduce energy waste and improve the system year-round and not just polar vortex events and storms. Please consider your distribution level resilience planning that is people-centered, not profit-centered, as a necessary step to protect New Orleanians' health and safety. And then the last comment I got was from a constituent this morning who asked me to read it. Her name is Laura Comiskey Murphy, and echoing the comments from earlier this morning, she says, "Good morning. I saw in the news that the council is having a hearing on the rolling blackouts on Mardi Gras Day. I'm a resident of Lakeview and I experienced the blackout at 7:15 p.m. I'm 85 years old and had no warning of the blackout. Thankfully, I was able to find one flashlight quickly. Had they warned me, I have hurricane supplies, including a kerosene lamp, candles, etc. I could have been ready. I not only lost my power, but it blew out my heating system. I had to leave my house in the dark late at night and go to a friend's house to get warm and stay. I was out of my cold house until an HVAC company could fix my heating system. Entergy sure doesn't care about their customers. Please voice my unhappiness with them. Thank you." So that concludes public comment. Do any of my colleagues have anything they want to say in closing? With that, I will entertain a motion to recess the Public Works Committee until March 18th at 10 a.m. May I have a second? Well, I may have the motion.
You made the motion. I'll second, Councilmember.
I move, seconded by Councilmember Moreno. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Hearing no nays, we stand adjourned until March 18th. Thank you very much.